Welcome to the Nightlight Astrology Weekend Wisdom Podcast. I'm Whitney Kranz. This is Alexandra Blair and Alex Amorosi. And we're going to talk about eclipse season today. But before we get into that, we have to point you over to nightlightastrology.com for all of Adam's incredible offerings, including the Guild, his various courses. We've got master classes running right now that I think you can still join. So definitely pop over there. And with that, guys, we've got a stacked eclipse season upon us here that starts on February 17th. I mean, we're getting some of the biggest astrology of the year in like a 2-week period. We've got both the eclipses, obviously. We have a once-in-a-lifetime Saturn-Neptune conjunction. We have Mercury retrograde happening at the same time. Just like initial thoughts, guys. What do you think before we jump into each of the transits?
Not only is the eclipse intense, it's ruled by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
Right. That's
which
part
is
of it.
Wild. I don't think all bad. I'm a rosy Sagittarius, but it's complex. Let's just put it that way. Very complex.
Yeah, I think it's stark astrology. I agree with Alex completely, and I know Whitney, you feel the same. Like, we're all big proponents on well-founded optimism, and there are certainly things to be optimistic about in the astrology of this entire year, and definitely in February. But it does feel a little bit like something stark, something information we've all been waiting on. I've been hearing from so many clients and friends that they are waiting longer than they thought they'd have to wait. They're sitting in something and they keep going, when? And I'm like, I think February. Like, I think just wait a couple more weeks, just hang in there.
Yeah, and it's so I've been experiencing the same, you know.
Yeah.
I've even just in the collective right now, I think we're feeling this pressure of what's going to happen. Things are really wild, and it's hard to believe that there could be even more, you know? And the thing that I love about eclipse season in general is that while these changes that eclipses bring can definitely be hard in the moment to manage, at the end of the day, eclipses really are here to push us along the road of our fate, right? And so in that way, it feels like a moment where we get to reckon with fate. And in that way, I think there is optimism and it can be exciting. But maybe that's just like a little bit crazy of me to think that's exciting. So, but let's dig into it. So we're going to talk about both eclipses today. We're going to talk briefly about Saturn-Neptune, and we're going to talk about Mercury retrograde as well. So let me share a chart with you on the screen. You guys can see that, right?
Here we go. We got it.
Yep.
Perfect. So this is the chart for the solar eclipse in Aquarius on February 17th. This is a solar eclipse is essentially a new moon on crack, right? This happens at 28 degrees. So it's another one of those sort of late degree new moons that we've been experiencing similarly for the last, several months, really since fall 2025. I'm interested to know, obviously, with what we've got going on here, and I'll just point out the eclipse right there on the screen in case you can't see it. But we've still got a lot of action here in Aquarius. What are your initial thoughts, guys, about this particular eclipse?
I think this is one of those eclipses where if you haven't gotten your stuff together, and you can use another word for stuff if you'd like, it will be gotten for you. Your shit will be gotten together for you. I think, but I don't think in a bad way. I think in a way where it's like, there's that reckoning kind of feeling you've been feeling on. It's like, okay, now we have to begin something new. Like it just has to happen. There's with Mars co-present with it, with Saturn and Neptune having just freshly moved out of Pisces into Aries. So just moving into this very action oriented space. There's something to me about an eclipse in Saturn sign while Saturn and Mars are in mutual reception with each other that says, like, things just have to get done now. Things just, and this is a new beginning that is just what this new beginning is going to be. Alexandra, we talked about, and I think the three of us have talked about how it gets drier around this time. There's more that sort of masculine, hot, dry energy that starts to come in February and March. And I think this is a little bit more of like whatever we've been crystallizing since the beginning of the year, whatever has been building, now is like, okay, we've got to get our stuff together and deal with it and move forward towards something that may feel slightly idealistic, maybe even feel a little bit unrealistic, but sometimes those sorts of feelings are the things that pull us forward to things that bring us an enormous amount of change. I also just want to say quickly too that we do have a very strong Venus and a very strong Jupiter during this eclipse, and they're moving into trines with each other. And the north node, so this is an out of sign eclipse. The north node is in Pisces, but the eclipse is in Aquarius. The north node is conjunct Venus. So there is a sort of background beneficent quality to this, especially around the sort of like fateful sort of cosmic slip and slide that I always think of as the nodes, right? That's kind of pulling you towards something. There's like a nice signature around that I think is very helpful in the background of the eclipse.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I'm so glad you pointed out the mutual reception between Mars and Saturn. That's a major dignifying condition, you guys. Like, I I hear a lot of breathless reminders like fallen Saturn, fallen Saturn. It's just as likely that a fallen malefic is a weak malefic than it is an extra
Exactly.
angry malefic. So let's put that out there. But mutual reception is a major dignifying condition for these two. And to have two exalted benefics, yes, the nodal activity. I even think Mercury in Pisces is kind of a nice softening, a gauzy softening to what's happening here, because what's happening in the masculine airy fire areas of Aquarius and Aries is stark. And so I like the idea that we have these like watery, impressionistic benefics and Mercury going on right here. There is something coming to mind, which is one of the least helpful phrases that we have to often trot out as astrologers, and it's like it could have been worse, which I think comes about when we have these exalted benefics. So there's this sense of like maybe whatever's happening could have been worse, whatever, however helpful that is to hear or isn't. But looking for, if we're looking for all of the ways that things suck, that is what we're going to see. There's this exercise that we did at Tony Robbins when I was 18 and went to a Tony Robbins event. And he's like, look around the room and try to find everything that's red. And you look around the room and you find everything that's red. And then he's like, okay, now tell me how many things you saw that were purple. And it's like, you literally can't see anything. You didn't see anything and weren't tracking anything that was purple. And I feel like the benefics are kind of offering us some blessed purple that if we're not looking for it, we're definitely not going to see it.
Yeah, I love that. I think the fact too that Venus and Mars are both sandwiching this lunation. I mean, not closely conjunct, right? But enough that it's carrying through. We've seen this cycle since that triple Cazimi in late Capricorn before the Capricorn new moon, right? And so there is a stories continuation that is happening here. But like you said, Venus is exalted in Pisces. She's also in her evening star position where she's strongest. Mars is also a morning star at his strongest here, right? And I think that part of what softens this, even though there isn't any sort of dignity involved with Mercury in Pisces and Jupiter in Cancer, but the fact that those two planets are also in this trine at this point feels like we're bringing through some correlations and integrations in those watery areas of our chart at the same time that we are sort of pushing things forward, maintaining things as we have an eclipse in a fixed sign ruled by a cardinal Saturn, right? Like it's almost making me think back to the water trines that we experienced from, late October-ish through mid-December-ish, and asking what came up then. I remember, we were excited about the water trines, and they were a little heavier, I think, than we all
Uh-huh.
thought, right?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Big
And
time.
so, but there's this moment for integration that I think is really coming up for us now, and asking us to, now that we're a little further out from those lessons, have that sort of Aquarian perspective, right, onto this situation. Perspective can help create integration. And I also think I've been talking about this time as a time of, especially with Neptune having moved into Aries now, this sense of the collective blindfold coming off, right? And
Amen.
that, right?
Amen.
And that
Yep.
goes back to that
Yeah, for sure.
perspective. This is really changing things for us. This is right. This is the sign of Aquarius, the people's sign. And so we have to talk about the collective a little bit, right?
I think also there's a sense here too with, an eclipse in Saturn sign, right? That and this might be just the way I've been experiencing the build to this in my own life. So, take this as more of an individual or anecdotal idea, but is building towards a sense of like a new beginning of maturity, a new beginning of stabilization, reality check, coming, like breaking the spell. And that's how I've been thinking about Saturn Neptune this whole time. And my research on the Saturn Neptune hard aspects, particularly the conjunctions, there tends to be some kind of spell that breaks, and I think that it really initiates a kind of action based on that 10,000-foot view of Aquarius, right? That sense of looking at all the components coming together and being like, let's not do that the same way again. Like, let's not go back to that same pattern that you've done the whole way, all the time. Let's actually get this fixed and do something now that feels that it's more stable, more mature, and has more lasting presence to it. I wouldn't necessarily say that if Saturn and Mars weren't in mutual reception here. I think the fact that Mars is there, in that mutual reception with Saturn, adds that quality. If it was just Saturn and Aries, I think we might have a slightly different flavor on it. But I really think that mutual reception bolsters up a sense of concrete, disciplined action on something that feels like, okay, I've stepped up into this level now. And we're taking a more realistic view, as opposed to the sort of Neptune and Pisces, anything means anything, anything could be anything, whatever I say is true, whatever anybody says is true, that sort of relativistic stuff. I think that starts to disappear pretty fast over the next couple of months.
Yeah, totally. I think that brings me back to when we think about like manifesting, and a lot of people like to focus on the part of manifesting that is radical belief. That's an important part of it. There's also aligned mundane action. You can't just look at your bank account and will money into it. You have to check your bank account every day, do things to make money, have a job, be creating things, right? You have to do these aligned mundane things. You can't attract a soulmate if you're never leaving your house and meeting anybody, right? So I think there's some of that. And Alex, I just love what you've said about I think we all agree about like the blindfold coming off, or the what the hell have I been watching, seeing behind the scenes, behind the curtain in some way. Mercury is an ally here in this. Mercury is going to be in Pisces this whole time. Mercury retrogrades here. It will conjoin Venus. It will conjoin Mars. I love this so much. I think Mercury in Pisces is an absolute ally in seeing things in a new way. I actually think Saturn in Aries has a different quality, but a similar outcome, where Saturn in Aries is willing to be an outsider and is willing to do things in ways that other people may not approve of, or that may not be well-established ways of doing. And so together, all of this feels a little bit like hey, I've been circling the drain on this thing for X number of months or maybe years. What if I said F the way that society says I should do this, or F the way that this has always been done by other people in of my peers, my peer group? What if I did it in a way that actually was authentic to me? And actually, it only has to make sense to me. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. And maybe there's way more resources from those benefics available for that approach than you have had available to you in the dry, sort of technical approach of stubborn persistence that we've been doing for however long.
Snaps
Yes,
for Alexandra. Snaps for Alexandra.
exactly. I think that's such a good I think that's such a good point about the allies we have here, because under a lot of heavy recent astrology, it is warranted and understanding that one might have some astro anxiety about this eclipse, right? But here's the thing with eclipses too, and I've said this time and again, and you're gonna hear me say it again, but like there's nothing we have to do about eclipses, right?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the universe talking to us and reordering as it must, and we just have to go with the flow. And isn't that what Venus and Mercury in Pisces trining that Jupiter are saying, is that we're just going to have to go with the flow. You know, Aquarius, Saturn in Aries, it can be hard to let go of that control right now, but this is a really important piece of how we, as both of you so beautifully said, sort of break through, or Alex, you said, breaking the spell, right? We're in a moment of kind of snapping out of it. I love that snaps came up, right? Because we're snapping out of it, guys. This is time. And I don't know, are you both ready to move to Saturn and Neptune? Because I think that might be a good sort of transition for us. Or any last thoughts here?
I just have one last thing, which is that your point, Whitney, about we don't have to do anything for the eclipses. I just want to drive that home as much as we can. Like, I think there's some missing information for a lot of people, especially if you have fixed sign placements. Whatever it is that you feel like you've been waiting, that waiting feeling, you were waiting for this information to come to you. But historically, thinking about the sun as being in Hellenistic astrology symbolic of fate, and the moon in Hellenistic astrology being symbolic of fortune. And when those things eclipse each other, it is like fortune creating change in the system of fate, or fated events taking place that alter our fortunes. And so it really is a tidal wave of energy, or as Whitney and I called it in our year ahead preview webinar, new fault lines. It really is like an earthquake.
The tectonic, right?
It's the tectonic plates. And it's not from the perspective of humans, which is fear. It is from the perspective of the earth, which is a neutral but terrain changing event. It doesn't have to be this terrifying thing. And it is not something you have to optimize or figure out how to work with or do a ritual to activate. Like, it's happening, it's coming.
Okay, so can I give my eclipse speech?
Yes,
Can I make a speech?
please do.
Yeah.
Please
Okay.
do.
A speech.
Speech.
What?
Speech.
Here it comes.
Like Arrested
I'm ready.
Development.
I'm ready.
Give us
Okay.
a Michael Bluth.
We've actually just started watching that show. I had never seen it before, and I can't believe I haven't.
God.
I know.
Your Virgo parts, it's for you.
It's
for
like
you.
I was like, how did I never see this? It is the funniest show I've ever
Please
seen.
text
Jason
me.
Bateman
I
is
haven't
I love
either.
him.
Alex.
Oh no,
Please
it's
text me
amazing.
everything.
I will. I totally will.
Okay.
Okay, but here's the speech. So the speech is, and I say this to clients all the time about eclipses. An eclipse is, so the first eclipse is like the universe takes you and throws you into a water slide. And you are just going to go where that water slide takes you. And if you try to stop in the middle of the water slide and put your foot on the side, the stream water is just going to beat you up. And so eclipses to me are always about like, let me just allow this to take me where I'm going, because there's this malefic quality to eclipses that I think gets sort of woven in or embroidered into the idea that probably to me comes from a feeling out of control. What would it have felt like in the ancient world to see the sun become dark? Well, out of control. I mean, whatever you know that what's going to happen? Will the sun come back? Right? These sorts of ideas. For a moment, everything is a little topsy-turvy and out of control, but that doesn't always mean bad. Now, I think sometimes for fixed signs, this happening in Aquarius, that is not that is not what we love as fixed signs. We would prefer it was predictable and exciting in a predictable way. This is much more like you're just going to go into the water slide until March 3rd. And that does not have to be a bad ride. It does not have to be a bad change. In fact, it's oftentimes a type of Uranian change. This is also square to Uranus, this eclipse, that can feel really refreshing because it's something you never even considered before. It's bringing you somewhere you hadn't even thought about before. So I think that that's my speech. My speech is over now.
No, well warranted,
Well put, well received.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And you bring up a really important thing here. This has been coming up in my life recently and in the lives of a lot of people close to me is the question you raise, Alex, of control, right?
Yeah.
We, excuse me, people have a lot of knee-jerk reactions to the feeling of loss of control. It can be incredibly unsettling to feel like you can't control what's happening around you, right? And so I think that's part of the test that is happening here is that we need to, what's that weird song, Let Jesus Take the Wheel or whatever? You know,
Carrie
we
Underwood,
need
yeah.
to, yeah.
Oh my God, I haven't thought about that song in years.
I don't even think I know that song, just that one line from
That's
that
like-
song.
We're going back once again to AOL Messenger.
Back to the good old days. But, just to hammer home the point or put the cherry on the top of that speech of yours is like, that really is the test here, is to learn how to move with the changes rather than resisting against it because you feel a loss of control.
And in the background of that is some nice energy with exalted Venus and exalted Jupiter.
Yeah,
in
look
the
at
background,
that.
it's a nice, like, there's a little bit of under the trapeze. There's a nice soft cushion in some way, and I think just trusting that the cosmos is there to catch us on this one. I think is a good one to see.
And Alexandra has been hammering home a really important point on this for weeks now. And it's that so much of how this goes for you is how you met those Pluto tests, right? All of the Pluto conjunctions in Aquarius. And so it's not that you did anything wrong or you can't, you're doomed because maybe you failed a Pluto test, right? But that's something to, as we're approaching this eclipse, think about. How have those Pluto conjunctions been showing up in your life? And what can you do now to work with that, to integrate it, right?
Yeah, that's something Alex and I talked about when we did our January month ahead overview on my channel. The Pluto test, how it sounds, how it smells, and how Pluto is there. And
Usually
kinda
smells
testing
funky.
you.
Usually smells a little funky. Pluto.
I have a
Yep.
client who does compost as a Pluto devotional activity. And this week
Love it.
she was like, it was so stinky this week. I was like, yeah, Pluto was working on a lot for you this week in the compost. But yeah, to your point, and Alex, I think we had a great conversation about this, but like the Pluto does send little tests your way. I don't typically qualify the universe or the planetary energies or the gods as testing us very often. I think they have better things to do. But it's like these Pluto tests are like, are you really changing? Because the Pluto changes happen so slowly that it's like, are you really changing? And if you fail, you'll have another test. You'll get to do it again.
Can I
Yeah,
give something on
please.
that, you guys. Like
Yeah, do
I'm
it.
gonna kind of keep out the details just for privacy's sake. But last night I had an example of this, and I just saw for a moment I was about to do something the way I have always done it, and not in a good way.
Right,
Like I was
exactly.
about to do, I was just about to pull something kind of immature, and I
Yeah.
stopped in the middle of it, and I felt like I'm in the Hall of Hades right now. He is staring at my ass, being like, "You better, you want to do this again? We'll do it. Go ahead. It's not going to end well." And I just had a moment of grace where I could stop and say, I am going to do this differently. When I have to have this conversation, I'm going to do it differently. And I did. And I felt released from it. Now, I'm not saying I catch these all the time, you guys. I'm by no means some sort of perfect saint in this regard. But it was a perfect example of that sort of Aquarius look at this from 10,000 feet, come up above it, get a little bit more dispassionate, and then do you want to do this differently? And I think the other thing with Pluto too is it doesn't require a perfect shift to something else. It doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden in the other place.
Right. You don't have to
It's
like
just
replace it.
exactly. It's just the willingness to be soft and pliable enough to go
Stand in a mess, take one step
one
in the
step,
right
a little
direction.
butterfly effect. Because that's something I see in energy work all the time. You change one little thing, and it has a ripple effect out. And
Right.
so that was just a moment that, to put a point on this, of like, you just see you're about to do this thing and almost feel compelled to do it. And it's just like, let me just pause here, and I'm going to do this differently. And it's going to feel hard, and I'm not going to like it. And it's going to pull up all this stuff. But then it's like, oh, something really did get transmuted there. Something really did get brought back to life within me and within the circumstances. So it was just, that's an example of that just came up literally
Totally.
for me last night.
Alex,
Yeah.
I had one too this in mid-January, and I actually like kind of failed it. I did things as I always have done.
Mm.
And because I have Pluto conjunct my MC, like Pluto, the price for that is always a purge. It's always taking me back to a hard reset of zero. And I was so physically ill. I had such a purge effect from it. And it was like, I was like, okay, for real, this is the last time. I swear. It actually was the last time. I swear to you, I've learned this lesson now. Like, it was so funny. I definitely
Yeah.
failed mine in mid January. And then at the end of January, I succeeded. The next time I was like, okay, I've touched the hot stove enough. It's over.
Exactly.
Gosh, you guys, it's so. I love hearing about your own Pluto tests in this moment because I've been going through it too. This Aquarius part of the chart is where my sun and my Mercury is. In fact, talk about missing information being revealed because this frickin' eclipse is happening right on top of my Mercury. But there's a way where this whole pileup in Aquarius and Pluto for me has taught me that I can't do things the way I previously did them because my fear of being seen or perceived or visible was holding me back, right?
Mm.
And it's amazing to understand those lessons in the moment. And I think that what your stories, what all of our stories are pointing to, are some of the themes we've already talked about, which I think does bring us over to the Saturn and Neptune conjunction really nicely. Because while we've been talking about this eclipse, obviously ruled by Saturn, having to do a lot with some of these keywords we've said, right? Blindfold being removed, breaking the spell, and breaking through. And I really feel like a lot of this is occurring because of what Saturn and Neptune are doing together. So if we're just, grounding into what we're looking at on the chart right now, on February 20th, that's only 3 days after the eclipse, Saturn and Neptune conjoin at 0 degrees Aries, and this is so historical. I mean, the last time that Saturn and Neptune conjoined was in Capricorn in 1989. And so it's a long cycle of conjunction anyway. But the fact that we're seeing it here at 0 degrees Aries at the very start of the zodiac, I think you've all heard this already, is really, really profound and marks a profound shift. Now, next week, we are going to do a deep dive, an entire episode of Weekend Wisdom focused on this. So if we talk about this today and you're like, wait, I want more, don't worry, we're going to get into it. Because we're focusing largely on eclipses, we might breeze past this one just a little bit. But I just want to bring it back to some of those things we've been talking about. One of the ways that I've been looking at this, for example, and this started coming through for me as early as to the day last March 30th when Neptune entered Aries, is these symbols of the breaking through or of being held back, right? It's like this symbol of hitting the glass ceiling, or like a bird flies into the window because their perception is distorted, right? They can't see. It looks like a mirror. That's some of the visual imagery that comes up for me with this transit. And so I think we can talk a lot more about lots of other themes around this too. But that's one of the things that comes up for me, is sort of this, like, in a way, it's like a blurring of reality, or the questioning of what is really here. And I think that that can apply to, you know, for examples like the blurring of horizons, right? Aries is the desert. When the heat rises in the desert and you see those waves, that's sort of the picture that I get of this moment. And we've seen that, right, with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn. I mean, the Berlin Wall came down. And so I'm just babbling at this point. I'm really eager to hear what you all have to say.
I didn't hear babbling. I heard awesome.
No, yeah.
Yeah. But, like, you know, it's interesting because we're coming from Capricorn, Saturn, and Neptune, I think, conjoined 3 times in 1989 in Capricorn, when Saturn was very powerful in Capricorn. Now we're having Saturn in fall, beginning a new cycle here, right? So a not as powerful Saturn, and a different flavor of Saturn that we're getting. So I think what's really going to be interesting about the spell breaking and everything you were saying, Whitney, I totally agree with. And I think also there's going to be something around both the softening of rigid polarities, but also the reestablishment of healthy polarities, because we need both, right? We need both the softening of the sort of the Saturn, this or that. It's this, you're either over here or you're over here. But we also need those polarities to say this is right and this is wrong. This is correct and this is incorrect. This is okay and this is not okay. And I feel like, especially for the last 3 years while Saturn has been in Pisces with Neptune, and if we use Richard Tarnas's measurement, about 15 degrees of engagement towards these major outer planetary cycles is when you notice it. So it's been a couple of years. There's this sense where it's just like all of those lines have been so blurred. And just kind of, we blurred the lines, and then we've gone to this point where it's just like, but then we get rigid about what we think it is. And now I think there's kind of this moment, like, it's the moment in the movie where everybody shakes their head and goes, wait, what just happened? But what just happened? And I think that begins with this conjunction. And oftentimes, the last thing I'll just say about it quickly, and we'll talk about this next week too, is oftentimes when the conjunction happens or soon after is when that process begins. There's often a sort of blurring and delusional space that precedes them. When a conjunction happens, that's usually a point where something starts to become more clear. That's what I've noticed in some of my very sort of basic research on this.
Totally. And also, I think whenever I see stuff like this, I'm always like, what are these people born right here going to be like when they're 30? Like, that's when it becomes clear. It's like when we see all the natives coming to adulthood with this, because I think about Saturn and Neptune in Capricorn. Now, important to note that Uranus was also there, but like those people, when I talk to clients and friends who have that lineup in Capricorn, those people work so hard and they have no sense of how hard they work.
Yep.
100% for those people is like 600% for anyone else. It is the work of 6 people, and it's generational, chain breaking Uranian work. It's generation defining work. They have no sense of it, right? At all. They just can't see that about themselves. And every time they kind of scale back, it's like, yeah, more, scale back
Hmm.
more. So I think about that a little bit here. But Alex, I love what you said, and I completely agree that we need. I like your word polarity, because I kind of have been thinking about like black and white morality. I hate that rhetoric, so I'm going to use polarity now. We with Saturn and but Neptune generally in Pisces have gone so deeply, dredged so deeply this moral gray area. We have seen a rise of morally gray as a genre of character, the
Yeah.
morally gray protagonist, the anti-hero. Whitney and I were talking about this on the February month ahead we recorded for my channel. I've talked about this a lot, but we have things like Tony Soprano, even things like Fleabag. It's like these are these
Hmm.
morally gray protagonists. We without advocating for any one future, I think it would be helpful to have a slightly strengthened sense of the polarities. We
Yeah.
need that. We actually do need that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, because oftentimes in that sort of moral polarity that you're talking about, Alexandra, one can stand on one side of that polarity and say, I am right. This is the superior and right way. But doesn't nature itself show us the importance of polarity? Hell, the chart that we're looking at right now in the dignity scheme and everything shows us the importance of polarity and the importance of hearing and understanding different beliefs than our own. We're talking about beliefs, right? Because of Neptune. And, you know, I think this is being shown situationally as well. The fact that, and I've shared this personally, like with Alexandra in our text messages, like right now in my life in Minneapolis, it's we've got a lot of chaos happening. And the ability to somehow continue to thrive personally while managing the fire of the streets and the situation and balancing that, like, how is it possible that these two scenarios can live in one container? And yet they do, because we need to hold on to the healing we create, the love we create, the positivity at the same time, that in order to recognize the severity of the other side of the spectrum,
Yeah.
fear, hate, etc.
Yeah. I agree. I think that you know, there can be, and I have seen in my own spiritual practice now of almost 30 years, there can be in many spiritual traditions this idea of, well, good and bad are kind of, mixed together, and it's all kind of this, all kind of that. Sometimes there's a right and wrong. Sometimes there just is. And that's what Saturn represents in a lot of ways. And it can also represent that in a sort of very extreme and rigid way, right? But the sense of, like, I love what you're saying, Alexandra, too, about like the morally ambiguous protagonist. Like, I think that there's sort of a clarity that comes back in the next few years. And what we're looking, when you're looking at these types of conjunctions, you guys, you're looking at like multi-year processes a lot of times to really see how they unfold.
Yeah.
But there's a more sense of like, this is correct and this is incorrect. Now, sometimes that can get self-righteous, definitely a fire sign, and that can get rigid. But sometimes it's good to reestablish that. This is correct and this is incorrect. This is what we do and this is what we don't do. It's just like basic, kindergarten. Like, we don't take each other's toys. We ask first before we do it. Like, that sort of stuff, I think, starts to suddenly seem to just come back. And one thing I just will say quickly, too, about this, and I definitely talk about this more in depth next week, is that a lot of times I notice with these conjunctions and just looking at some of the history around it, it just seems to return. It's a very Neptune thing. Like all of a sudden, we almost forget what was going on, just a few months before in favor of this. Like, oh, yeah, of course we knew this was right and wrong. But it doesn't necessarily always flow from some sort of traceable source. It just starts to happen, which is
I feel
Neptune
like
all
I'm
all
so
the way.
seeing this, Alex, and like help me tease this out. I've tried to, and then my recording got foiled with Whitney, but like the return of people smoking cigarettes. It just happened. It's just happening. And I'm like, this is Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. And it's just happening. Like, didn't we all, I think for a
That's what I
long
noticed with
time.
Ilya in
Yeah.
in Heated Rivalry. He's just sitting there.
Yes. And the
Smoking
actors
butts.
and like everybody smoke the rise of smoking cigarettes. I'm like, oh my God, it's Saturn and Neptune. When I think about Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, I'm thinking like I use these examples a lot, but I'm thinking of people driving off into the desert, villains,
Yeah.
natural
Yeah.
born killers, or House of a Thousand Corpses, or I think it's Devil's Rejects actually at the end of that one where they drive off, or Bonnie and Clyde. It's like the cigarette. I'm like, oh my God, it's just happening. We're all just going back there. And that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's interesting is what I have to say about that.
It's like throwing caution to the wind, right? And stepping into this idea of like a whole new world, really. I mean, what comes to me is remember the book Brave New World? Like that's
Totally.
how I'm feeling about this situation here. I mean, all good things said. What comments do we have before we move on to Mercury retrograde?
I'm good. We'll cover this more in depth next week for sure.
We sure will.
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to, I guess I should at this moment just honorably mention that on February 22nd, Venus and Jupiter come into a trine, right? From Pisces to Cancer. This is that moment of and Jupiter come into under the Aquarius eclipse and looking for the silver lining, we will be able to find that silver lining, find that fresh perspective. And so then what happens shortly after that, I'll take us to our chart for Mercury retrograde. Mercury stations retrograde on February 26th at 22 degrees of Pisces. Now, this is a Mercury retrograde in both its detriment and fall. I'm hearing the pop astrologers right now who are out there saying, sign your contracts before Mercury retrograde in
Jesus.
Pisces, right? Because this, it might be a little tough, or a Mercury retrograde kind of a couple weeks. Now, does that stop us from living life? Hell no. You better believe I'm going on vacation in March, whether Mercury is retrograde or not, okay? So we're looking at about a span of 3 weeks here, right? From February 26th to March 20th, when Mercury will eventually station direct at 8 degrees Pisces. So covering a lot of territory there in Pisces. What's interesting to note, I think, is that station direct point happens exactly on the North Node, really making, as we're talking about eclipse season and all of these twists of fate, this Mercury retrograde feels quite fated and divinely timed. So I'm eager to hear what you both have to say about this Mercury retrograde in the midst of eclipse season.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Jupiter moves direct during the retrograde. I think right as Mercury is moving through the Cazimi, and then Jupiter, the host of the retrograde, moves direct. It strikes me that the beginning of the retrograde is more of the past-looking review process that we think about with Mercury retrograde, going back over something, and then both the host turns direct, and then Mercury turns direct in mid-March. that's definitely a moving forward on whatever was gathered up or reviewed in some way. Now, in Pisces, I think what's really cool about Pisces is that Mercury is retrograding and going back over things that may feel a little nostalgic, that may feel a little bit like that was a beautiful part of my past and I'm looking forward to the future. That may feel a little bit like also we're getting a reality check that began with the eclipse of like what was real and what was not real, what was imagination and what was our imagination, what was actual fact. And I think we get that much more towards the end of the retrograde when Jupiter turns direct. But I think turning direct on the North Node, we're going to be pulled towards something new. The question is, are we pulled towards something new that has idealistic vision and grounded, or are we pulled towards something new that we've just created in a total fantasy? The North Node will always pull you and almost compel. It's almost like a Pluto-like energy. It compels you. And kind of also knowing the other thing that just keeps coming up for me, especially with Saturn moving deeper into Aries, is knowing when enough is enough. That is also the North Node, is like the hungry ghost of like, okay, I'm actually full now. I've done what I needed to do. Like the impulse can be like just one more thing. It's not so much like I'm gonna repeat the same pattern. It's like I need more of something. And it's just like knowing when you're full, knowing when you've had enough of something is important with that station direct. And we'll cover that in depth as we get there in March too, my friends.
Totally. I want to bring something in just to underscore what we're talking about too, which is that Pisces and Aries are signs that are connected via a Hellenistic ancient concept called contra antitia. And Aries and Virgo are connected via antitia. And I'm not going to go into the like philosophical underpinnings of that now. Check out Adam's Nightlight Astrology School if you want to learn about that. But what that means is that Virgo and Aries are kind of in a sneaky conjunction, and Pisces and Aries are kind of in a sneaky opposition. And so it's all tied in. Now, it's not necessarily happening by degree. And so we're thinking sign based, we're thinking just like sort of archetypally that these things are opposed in some sneaky way or connected in some sneaky way. And I bring that up because we are obviously, this Mercury retrograde in Pisces is leading us up to the eclipse that's happening in Virgo right after this, which we'll get into. So it feels like I totally want to echo what Alex said about the initial part of this Mercury retrograde is like going back. And that's kind of a blessed little thing that's happening there because Mercury is being hosted by Venus exalted. So Venus is definitely helping Mercury out, and Venus and Mercury even make a conjunction here, which is awesome. When Mercury stations direct again, Venus will be in detriment in Aries soon after that, and Mars will be coming in to conjoin Mercury in Pisces. So it's less gauzy, it's less kind, it's less sweet. Like the first part of this Mercury retrograde is like, let me go back through my journals and look at what I wrote about this and that. And it's kind of sweet. And I feel like what happens is that we're like, it's almost like I've had this experience looking back at my journals, which I think is going to be sweet. And what I realize is, oh my God, I've been writing about how unhappy I am with this part of my life or this person in my life or this habit that I have for 6 years. I've been writing about this for 6 years. In my own handwriting, I have the audacity to say it to myself, and then I'm like, oh my God, never again. And you have that snap to productivity or sort of like tension where you're like, wow, I don't think I'm going to let this go another season. I don't think I'm going to do this again to myself. That to me feels like the story of the Mercury retrograde. And I agree with you, Whitney. I do tell clients who are like realtors or do contract stuff, try not to sign contracts during Mercury retrograde. I've had to. You just make do. You're going to have like a silly error or something funny that happens. But Mercury in Pisces is one of the weirdest ones. I think people demonize this one unnecessarily strongly because it's detriment and fall. It's also ruled by the greater benefic who is currently exalted. So I just am not thinking that it is as worrisome probably as a lot of people will rush to paint it.
Well, exactly. And in that whole sign trine will form exact trine
Yeah.
to Jupiter, that cute little Venus Mercury conjunction here. This is not something to spiral out about. But in terms of like greater themes that I think you were both addressing, and Alexandra, we talked about this on your channel. I think this is really a wonderful moment for reconciliation, right? There is a softness that we are
Mm.
able
Hmm.
to hold with Mercury in Pisces here in this particular formation. And that reconciliation aspect, right? The nature of Pisces is to reconcile the fact of transcendence with the reality of humanity. And so that's part of what we're working through here. And I'm just going to say, I hate that people villainize this Mercury in Pisces situation in general. I think Mercury in Pisces can bring out some of the most beautiful creativity.
Maya Angelou, Lady Gaga.
Exactly,
I mean,
right?
we
Like,
talked about
yeah.
heated rivalry. Let me tell you, Connor's story has Mercury retrograde combust in Pisces, and he learned Russian in 2 freaking weeks.
Right.
Don't
It's
tell me Mercury
insane.
retrograde combust in Pisces can't do stuff for us.
Exactly. And I think, let's bring it. Are you guys ready if I bring this to
Yeah.
Yeah.
the Virgo
Bring us home,
lunar
babe.
eclipse? Okay, because here we are with the Virgo total lunar eclipse. And I think this flows beautifully into this conversation. And just a note, this happens on March 3rd at 12 degrees of Virgo. This is the full moon moment. Obviously, the moon in Virgo opposing the sun in Pisces. And what's happening here is that this eclipse is ruled by Mercury retrograde, right? On the chart here, you can see Mercury sandwiched in there between the sun and Venus. And so it's important. It's important that we talk about what this Mercury retrograde is doing and how we are what we are revisiting through this Mercury retrograde, because it holds some weight with how we experience this eclipse at all. And I think this is a really good opportunity because we already know this storyline, right? We've been working with eclipses on this axis, which is different to the Aquarius one we started out with, right? We've been working with eclipses on this axis now for almost a year. And so it is very likely that what is coming up for us, we kind of already know the storyline. It's just pushing us further along,
Yeah.
or with Mercury retrograde, rather than pushing us forward, it's asking us to return and to revisit in order to, right? Virgo just wants to get it right. You know what I mean? Virgo just wants to get it right. And so there's part of us that is part of this that is asking us to, in the vein of getting it right, go back and revisit. But I also think, and then I want to open it up to hear what you both have to say, is that we have, and I'll just forward the chart once more here. We have this eclipse in this beautiful sextile to Jupiter, the sun trine to Jupiter. And isn't that interesting? Because it feels like some growth serum for this blossoming moment that is essentially, our full moon moment on crack, and also maybe teaching us that if Virgo just wants to get it right, like, we don't grow by getting things right all the time, right? We grow by failing forward and allowing ourselves sometimes to fail forward. And so that's really what's coming through for me when I look at this chart. Tell me more.
One thing I think we're going to be working on with this whole eclipse, Mercury retrograde stuff that's going on is forgiving ourselves for times where we've been deluded out of hope and where we have missed details, maybe willfully so, so that we could have some sense of hope that wasn't really there or wasn't really warranted, or because we wanted something, or, on the dark side of Pisces, because we were being manipulative. That I'll just say, that could be the dark side of Pisces, is sort of manipulative, trying to get something through, savior stuff or martyr stuff or guilt or whatever. So I think that this, it's funny looking at this configuration with Jupiter in Cancer, again, just about, what's the date on this? It's just about to turn direct. And like I said, in a week, we'll turn direct. There's something also here about bringing back an intrinsic sense of emotional safety that comes from that. Like when you get real with yourself and about the things that you may have missed and the times you're deluded. Like I always teach about intuition. The best way you learn about your intuition is when your intuition failed and you look back and said, I knew something, I saw something, I was aware of it and I didn't listen to it. There's a real sense of emotional coherence that comes back from your own perspective being clear again. But with Virgo, and I will say it with 4 planets in Virgo, self-forgiveness, not beating yourself up for details you missed, not beating yourself up for, you didn't quite get it exactly the way it was supposed to be. Who fucking cares? It's just like you can move on with this sense of I'm coming back into my own sense of emotional safety by having clarity about what was real and what was not real, where I deluded myself, where I didn't trust or listen to my intuition. And then just moving on from there, taking it all as good data. In the best sense of Virgo, taking it as good data to move forward with,
I love that so much, Alex. I think that is clear. It is clear that with Mercury retrograde and Pisces ruling this Virgo stuff, that perfectionism isn't going to work. Having a concrete idea about how it's going to go down isn't going to work. And that might have even worked, weirdly enough, like with the Aquarius eclipse, that's like a fixed air sign. There's a certitude implied in that. This is not that at all. This is like immediately, being asked to be flexible with your vision, with your action, with yourself, immediately being asked to be flexible. And I just think this is really interesting because there was I think about a lot of my clients who were born in 1955, 65, 66. There was a conjunction series that happened with Pluto and Uranus right here in mid Virgo at like 16, 17 Virgo. I just have a lot of those clients. And so I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about ways that we are going to be asked to deeply change our relationship to perfectionism. And, perfectionism is such a word that we throw around. Yeah, please don't touch it. How would that be? No, thank you. Perfectionism, it's not just like black and white perfectionistic thinking. It's like inbuilt scarcity mentality and mentalities that keep us from even trying or aspiring to something else. I wouldn't do that, or I can't do that, or that's not how it's done. It's really interesting.
Or people like me can't do blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it goes back to this idea that we're going to want to, at this time, err more on the side of creativity over analysis, right? You were saying this, Alex, right? That the good data, I love that. I love that term for Virgo, right? The good data doesn't always have to look like all of the exact numbers, and right? Good data is experience, it's feeling, it's the way our nervous system reacts in times of pressure, right? And so when you're talking as well, Alexandra, about this importance of, flexibility over sort of fixed ideals right now, I mean, yes, absolutely. This is an eclipse in a mutable sign. And so it's kind of like we just have to have that, like when you're snowboarding or you're skiing and you keep your knees like really flexible, right? Because you're not going to be too rigid in your stance, because if you are rigid in your stance, you're going to fall, baby, and that's going to hurt, you know?
Yeah, it's that flexibility I think is so important, particularly in your own thinking. And Virgo, for as detail oriented as Virgo could be, it's a flexible sign. It's a mutable sign.
Exactly.
And this is all happening between, if we look at this configuration we have on screen, it's mutable and cardinal energy that's going on here. So it's movable, it's changeable, there's things that can initiate from it. And I think, I will say, I think when we do a retrospective look at our own selves, and we're really honest with ourselves about things, we're really honest about the situation, we're honest about what happened, it just gives us a good launch pad. And that's what Virgo does, is like, I have my notepad and I have all the information down and I've cataloged it, so I know the next time what that is. And there's so much that can happen in our lives that we can be rigid about, especially with ourselves. We can be rigid about, like, it should have been, and I could have, the perfectionism idea comes in, right? Like, it could have, I should have, would have. And there's a point with this eclipse to me, especially because the eclipses conjoin the South Node, of a long cycle of that kind of thinking being asked to soften up, being asked to be like, every single one of us has had to learn in our lives. Every single one of us has negated our intuition and then done something stupid or gotten ourselves into a tough situation, and how to get out of it. But everything with that, there's a sense of, you can let go of the Virgo judgment, guilt. The dark side of Virgo is always judgment and being hypercritical and guilty. You don't even know why you feel guilty, you just feel guilty. There's a sense of letting go of that and, like, I'm coming to trust my perceptions again. I'm coming to trust that what I see is what I see, and what I hear is what I hear, and what I know is what I know. And I think that speaks to the larger thing we've also been talking about with Saturn and Neptune, which we'll definitely get into next week.
Totally. I am always struck by this because I have a lot of Virgo friends, a lot. All my friends are Virgo women. And they're always like, yeah, a lot of them are like, yeah, I do like things clean, but I'm not a freak about cleanliness. And they're always kind of surprised about this, like, stereotype about Virgos. And I think when I think about my Virgo women friends, I'm like, it's actually not that everything has to be absolutely freakishly clean or sterile. That feels more like the fixed Aquarius eclipse energy, that's going on there. It's like they want it just so. They want it their just so. And a lot of my Virgo friends have these little, like, earthy Virgo nests. Like, I feel like you can tell a Virgo's house when you're in one, because they have these little, like, nests, these warm, very organic shapes and nests around that you can see. So I think there's definitely something there about, don't forget, there's like a neuroses implied in Virgo, and it's easy to even think about yourself as being rigid, but Virgo is a mutable, feminine, earthy sign. It's muddy, and it can be very messy, and it can be very empowering to be in the mud of that alchemical, Mercury ruled, transformative state of the feminine magician archetype. It does not, just so is comfortable for sure. But just so is actually kind of a state of mind, and it can be an internal state for a Virgo person. So know that things are exactly as they are because you are there. You are creating this stuff around you. And so it's kind of like, you can bring it with you anywhere you go. It doesn't have to, it's not an external state of being.
Make the nest portable. Make the Virgo nest portable. I love it. What's screaming in my head right now is that saying, bless this mess.
Yes.
Sometimes you just have to let it go and understand this is your mess. This is your stuff, right? We're not talking about just physically and the dishes on the kitchen counter, right? We're talking about the mess that we all have inside because we're never going to be perfect. That's just how it is. And Virgo also, in the beauty of this archetype, is a healer, right? That feminine magician is a healer. She's the witch in the woods. And so I think there is this potential for healing coming through in this storyline, through maybe even some of those topics of reconciliation that we've been talking about with
Totally.
this Mercury retrograde. I also want to just note, because I changed the chart on the screen and we've been speaking to the themes, but we also under this eclipse have Venus in coming into an exact sextile with Uranus, which I think is only strengthening sort of that, like if I can just say again, the bless this mess vibe, right? So the other thing I wanted to do is let you all know March 10th is the day that Jupiter stations direct. Just to, ground us in the facts. Of course, I pulled up my ephemeris over here to make sure we knew. What I feel like this has given us and our listeners a really good overview of the experiences that we may be working throughout eclipse season. Do you have any last advice before we close it out for this time?
Not really. I think we've done a good cover for it. I don't know if Alexandra does.
No, I
Alexandra?
agree. I mean, I think we've done a really thorough job. My son is determined to touch my keyboard, so we're going to have some chaos. But I have one parting wisdom, which is like, I'm kind of thinking of like a big elaborate game of Pictionary. Come here, bug. And I'm like, you're standing at the board and you've drawn something and everybody's guessing the same thing. They're guessing the same thing over and over. And you're pointing at the board, the thing you already drew, and you're like this, and they're saying the same. And it's like this little end point of this eclipse is like, draw anything else. Draw anything else. Guess anything else. It's like, don't just keep tapping at the thing you've drawn and that you've been doing. Be flexible and be weird. And I think Mercury is so cool here in Pisces. I'm so excited about this, like Mercury retrograde in Pisces. I just feel like it's going to be fresh and new and change things for us in a way that I think is so needed. It feels like
Agreed.
cool waters,
Agreed.
It really does.
Yes.
Baptism of nonsense is kind of what it feels like.
Yes. And maybe even some of that baptism by fire with Saturn and Neptune.
And those antishas
happening.
and contra antishas. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I think you summed it up perfectly. I would just say once again, like, take it easy over these weeks. Don't put yourself, if possibly avoidable, through things you're going through that you don't need to go through. Rest. We don't do rituals under eclipses, right? Resist prediction.
Yeah, these Virgo eclipses have been messing up everybody. I think eclipses always mess up people's digestion, but the Virgo ones, especially,
Yes.
everybody's tummy's upset during these Virgo eclipses.
Be prepared to feel a little weird, right? But at the end of the day, like, let the flow of fate take you. That's where it is. No resisting, right?
Totally.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Weekend Wisdom, and you will see us next week for the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. We'll see you then, everybody.